think theology's for the clergy. I just believe in Jesus.
Certain hermeneutics of eschatology demand an exegetical approach.
I think you shouldn't question what you were taught in church. Isn't that blasphemy or something?
Theology. Unplugged.
Okay. Welcome to Theology Unplugged. This is Michael Patton, and we have a special time this time. We have a special guest. We have my son who's with us. I've been trying to get him to do this with me for a long time. He will jump in and help me out. Actually, I'm going to teach to you all, but I'm also going to teach to him. Don't forget to subscribe if you're on YouTube. Don't forget to hit that bell, and you will get a message every time that I post something new. And welcome to all of you who are coming just through Theology Unplugged. And I did a Theology Unplugged earlier today. I was laying in bed. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I thought about it until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And then I just decided I jumped up and do it. No preparation, no nothing, except for what I was thinking about. Got real excited about it and did a 45-minute Theology Unplugged, but you'll never hear that one. This is the redo of it with Will in front of me. Will, my son, say hi, Will.
Hello.
All right, he kind of sounds like me, so don't get us mixed up. Can you just do your regular voice so you sound like you have a high voice instead of trying to deepen it like you're cool?
I don't possess the ability on camera. I mean, if you catch me off guard, I'll be able to do it. But
he's sitting over here. We did not get the camera set up for him, but maybe he'll stick his head in a little bit later. But his hair is kind of wild right now.
Yeah, I was trying to take a nap.
Okay. I'm going to talk about... Here, I'm just going to face towards you, Will. I'm going to talk about a group called the Hasidim. Now, you understand the basic overview of the Old Testament, to where you have the creation of Israel, and then you have the law given to them, and they were supposed to do all kinds of things that they never did do, and then they had various kings, King David, King Solomon, king after king after king, and none of them did well, right?
Yeah.
Well, in the Old Testament law, in Deuteronomy 28, it gives a list of blessings and curses. God says, hey, if you keep all the law, your land will be perfect all the time. You will always have food. You will always be protected. But if you break the law, there's a big list of curses. And all these curses are basically, I'm going to kick you out of the land until you get everything straight, right? And this happened. I mean, you had them just coming into the land from Egypt. And they were in Egypt in exile for a little bit. Came back, got into the promised land, lived there for maybe, 600 years, 700 years, never followed the law, never fulfilled it at all. They got exiled. Half Israel got exiled in 722, the other half in 586. And so you have them going to, King Nebuchadnezzar comes, takes all their kids, and takes half the people from Israel into Babylon. They're in Babylonian captivity. This happened for a couple hundred years. And so, finally, at the very end of the Old Testament, Nehemiah, you have Nehemiah and Daniel and all those stories, but they are finally released from Babylon after a few kings later. And they go back to Jerusalem, kind of with their heads down, thinking, what are we going to do? Then starts the 400-year period. We call this the 400 silent years between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And during these 400 silent years, think of this. All the people got together of Israel, all these people who actually wanted to follow God, all these people who learned their lesson, and they're like, gosh, God, it was true that what the Bible said, and now we had to go into exile. Let's make sure that doesn't happen again, right? I'm going to tell you about this group called the Hasidim, and I want you, I don't know whether you're going to do it automatically or if I need you to do it. I'm not really sure, but I'll bring it back around to that. But compare these groups to the groups throughout all the time, especially today. It'll be interesting for you. And I'll explain more as we go. So, a group called the Hasidim. And not sure what that name means. It may mean the Hasidim, the devoted ones, something like that, right? the ones that are really eager to do what's right, right? You've got the Hasidim who comes together and they all ask questions. You see, they got their land back, right?
Yeah.
But here comes Alexander the Great and the Greeks. They took the land. But they didn't make him leave. They were still living in the land, right? And so as they come back, they know they don't have the land themselves, but they are back in the land, and they don't want to get exiled again. And so they get together. Picture them all huddling up, this Hasidim, all these devoted Jewish people coming back and wanting to do what's right finally. And they huddle up, and they say, what can we do? Let's make sure this never happens again, right?
Yeah.
We've got to be able to stay in the land, not get exiled anymore, not have the curses come upon us anymore. So we really have to follow God's law. So they really tried to decide. This was the most devoted group. The temple was rebuilt, because we got the temple in the New Testament. Jesus went to the temple. The temple was rebuilt, and these people were trying to follow the law. But they disagreed in the Hasidim. You had 3 different factions in the Hasidim. One said this: all right, guys, the Greeks are here. They have polluted our temple. We cannot follow the law. They're not trying to do bad. They're not trying to say, yay, we don't have to follow the law. They're saying we cannot do it here. We cannot truly be devoted because they won't let us be devoted. I mean, we've got their flag hanging. We got their king on our coins. So everything in Jerusalem is polluted. Let's go somewhere else and follow the law the best we can. Okay, these became the Essenes, and you don't necessarily have to remember this name, but I think it's interesting. You've got the Essenes, and these are the ones that went to the Dead Sea community. You know the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Never heard of it, no.
You never heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Oh my God, don't say that out loud.
Why?
No, it's not that important right now. It just has to do with the manuscripts. We found in 1948 what are called the Dead Sea Scrolls. The shepherd guy was walking along with his sheep, and he saw all these caves, and he was throwing his rock into one of the caves to see if his sheep fell it or went in there and, hit it and bah! But he threw it in. He started breaking. So he goes up there and looks, and there's all these documents, tons and tons of documents of the Old Testament, plus the other writing as well. But this was from the Hasidim. They kept all these documents. They read much. They had even the Book of Enoch was there. But we have an old Isaiah scroll. It's called the Isaiah scroll, and it goes back 400 years before Christ. That's where you got Isaiah 53, where it just a prophecy about Christ is perfect, and we have the documents that date 400 years before Christ, where it talks about him being crucified for our sins, or dying for our sins, and raising from the grave and everything. But anyway, that's a different story. We'll talk about that some other time. The thing I want you to remember here is these guys went somewhere else to follow the law, right?
Yeah.
And they were very devoted.
So the group split up though, like.
Yeah. So you're gonna split.
They didn't stick together though, like in the same land. I mean, you said there was like just different viewpoints.
Different viewpoints. So the Essenes went off to a different land.
Yeah. Okay.
Now you got 2 people in the land.
I mean, do they have a? So I guess that's why they have a different name, because they're not really a part of the same group.
Talk into that.
They're not really like a part of the same group anymore since they split off from it though.
Yeah, that's right. But originally they were, and they were just trying to figure out how to do this. The second group, you had. Here's the way they thought. They said, listen, the Romans are here. By the time of Jesus, it was the Romans. The Greeks and the Romans are here. It's God's will for them to be here. They're doing a lot of stuff that is very beneficial. Their money system, the roads they're making. So this must be something we are to get involved in. But not only did they say, let's get involved in it, they said, let's adjust our thinking a little bit, maybe our theology and the way we do things. And they wanted to kind of live as the Greeks did. They were ready to integrate. They said, let's integrate, let's mix in. Let's do the same things they're doing and see them as blessings from God. So they were going to the bathhouses, which, were just kind of a weird place back then. And bathhouses and the festivals, the Olympic type things. They were going to all the festivals of the gods, or at least allowing them. And so they still worship God, Yahweh, but they integrated their acts and their thinking along with the people that's already in the land, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you the name of them in just a second, okay?
Okay.
Then there was a third group, And that third group, if you can think of it, you have one far to the right, one far to the left, and there's one right in the middle.
Yeah.
And the one right in the middle said, no, let's do our best. We have to stay in Israel, but we also have to follow the law. We don't like that people are here. We don't like what the Greeks are doing, what the Romans are doing. And one day God will bring in somebody that will overthrow this, but let's follow the law to the letter while we are in Israel. And they did. They followed the law to the letter. So much so that every law that they had, if you were following the Sabbath, don't work on the Sabbath. That was part of the law, right?
Yeah.
They said they put all these rules up, like you cannot even spit on the ground on the Sabbath because your foot might go across it and it might be considered plowing.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was just crazy how many things they had. And it's not only that. All these things they built around the law to protect the law, right? I mean, they've got the law here, and they say, how do we know whether we really broke it? So let's just, then they make it kind of harder and harder to not break the law. I mean, in every way to break it. I mean, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So they built a wall around the law to protect the law, and the wall itself became a law, right?
Okay.
So you have that group. And that group, the other group over here, that were the integrationalists. You got the separationists, the integrationalists, and then the preservationist, maybe.
Yeah.
Hey, that was pretty good. But the separationists were called the Essenes. The integrationalists, you have any idea what they would be called?
No.
They are called the Sadducees. Yeah, do you know how the Bible talks a lot about the Sadducees?
Yeah.
Then the one in the middle were called the Pharisees.
Okay.
So you got the Pharisees, the Sadducees,
Yeah.
and the Essenes. And so the Pharisees and Sadducees didn't like each other. Because the Pharisees looked over the Sadducees and they thought they were compromising, which indeed they were in a lot of ways. And then the Sadducees would look at the Pharisees and go, you're just stupid and naive.
Yeah.
You still believe all this stuff. Let's advance with the culture. Mm-hmm. And so they fought quite a lot. So much so that many times in the Bible, you have Jesus being in the middle of them fighting, right? One of them was, one time the scribes, the Sadducees and the Pharisees came up to Jesus. They said, all right, tell us this. Because it was kind of an old argument that they use. You know, the same arguments that we use sometimes over and over again within a culture. Like, if God is real, how do you explain evil? You know? That kind of stuff. Well, they came up, they said, the Sadducees used to make fun of the Pharisees, saying, you still believe in the resurrection of the dead?
Yeah.
And they said, yes, of course we still believe in the resurrection of the dead. And the Sadducees will go, okay, tell me this. Well, a man dies and he leaves his wife. And according to the law, his brother marries her, right? Mm-hmm. That's how the law was made up. But that brother dies as well, and according to the law, the next brother marries her, and then he dies as well, and then finally the next brother marries her. And they say, which wife will she be, right? And so they were trying to show that the resurrection couldn't be true because he would have too many wives in heaven, right? And Jesus doesn't, I mean, he doesn't even deal with their issue of explaining it, really. He just says, there won't be any marriage in heaven, or at least it won't be like we have it today, right?
Yeah.
But he said, you're foolish and you don't believe the word of God. If the Bible says after Abraham died that God is the God of Abraham, is he the God of the living or the dead? If they're calling him the God of Abraham, of course Abraham is still alive, even though he's dead. But he basically was arguing with the Pharisees. He agreed with the Pharisees in their theology, disagreed with Sadducees who thought there wasn't any resurrection. That's why they were so sad, you see. You'll remember that forever now. But so you have Jesus agreeing with them, but also you have him fighting with the Pharisees. Because remember the wall that the Pharisees built up? The thing that I said around it?
Around the laws.
Yeah, and it became the law. He was always telling them, hey, why are you worried about spitting on the ground whenever you're not worried about resting on the Sabbath? The Sabbath was made for resting, and you don't even care about that. You just care about all your little bits and pieces that make it impossible to live, to where you can't even pick grains as you're walking by on the Sabbath and eat them if you're hungry. So Jesus was, he agreed with the basic theology of the Sadducees, but he did not like their legalism. They were legalistic. That all they cared about was the little side laws that protected the inside laws. Mm-hmm. And then they would neglect the weightier. Jesus said one time, you neglect the weightier things of the law, the things that are more important, like showing mercy to people. You're scared of whether you're going to spit on the ground or who's spitting on the ground. And so none of the groups did real well in the Bible. The Pharisees were the closest to theologically right, but at the same time, they didn't do things right either because they were legalistic. So you got the separationists, which you don't really see. John the Baptist may have been a Essene. He may have been a separationist. You got the separationist, the integrationalist, and the preservationist. And Jesus comes right in the middle of them and basically just rocks everybody's world, right? He comes into this society and everybody's talking. Whenever he teaches at the temple the first time, everybody starts talking and saying, who is this guy? He speaks differently and he speaks with great authority. Everybody marveled at Jesus' teachings. Of course, I'm sure we would, right? But he just taught differently. That was one of the main things that they thought about. Nobody teaches like this. And so he goes around, he gains a following from this, but he's always fighting with both of these groups, the two that were in Jerusalem. And like I said, agreeing more theologically with the Pharisees, but still fighting with them because they only cared about their rules around the law. Now, my argument here is this, that every culture has their Essenes, their Sadducees, and their Pharisees. Every culture, every religious culture especially, every church area, you can name every type of person will follow in one of the footsteps. If you're a religious person, if you're a Christian, I could ask you and say, which one are you? Are you a Essene? Are you a Sadducee? Or are you a Pharisee? Where do you have the tendency to go? Because all of us have the tendency to go one of these places. Let me give you an example. Can you think of anything within the Christian culture, even in Christian America here, that would be like the Essenes? And they say, we're not sticking around the way things are going. We're going off by ourselves and doing everything by ourselves.
Yeah, Protestants, Reformation.
Well, what kind of Protestants? Have you ever seen any of that? They're so scared of doing anything like the world is doing. If the world does it, we don't do it.
No, I can't think of any examples.
There are groups that are within Christianity, within Protestant Christianity as well. They have separated themselves so much they won't use electricity.
Oh, like Amish?
Yeah. Okay. They won't use electricity. They won't use cars. Why? Because the people do it. Because that's the world. And they define the world so differently, and they don't really ever come up with, well, wait, why is it wrong? Why is electricity wrong? Why isn't it a blessing? That kind of stuff. It's just because the world does it. And if the world does it, the further we stay away from it, the more we won't break it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have them, and you have those in our culture today. And it may not be so, you may not be the type of person that is so radical, and you may not say, let's go live in a different town. But let me give you an example. Maybe you are a Christian, and you say, this will make some people mad because I think it's a good illustration. I'll go more extreme first. You may be a Christian, you say, I'm not going to go to the university, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just too many unbelievers, too much bad teaching. I know there's legitimacy to that as well, but I'm going to start my own school, and it's going to be a Christian school.
Yeah. And
that Christian school will teach the way that we're supposed to teach. You see how they kind of create a new community?
Yeah.
And they don't do anything else. It goes so far sometimes as there's Christian telephone companies. You know, you have to use a Christian telephone company. You go to Christian school. You go to a Christian church. You try to find a Christian job. And sometimes that's what we do. We may not be extreme as the Essenes, but we get ourselves out of town in every way we can.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have any friends at all that aren't Christians, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do anything the Christians do. Now, you have the Essenes who leave town in order not to, but the people who are within town, they do the same type of thing. Well, I'm going to live among the unbelievers, but I'm just going to make sure I separate myself from everything they do. And if it's even possible that what they're doing breaks the law or isn't Christian, then I'm going to stay away from that. Now, you have people that do that as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. You have people who say, I don't go to the movies. I don't play cards.
Yeah.
I don't, it may not be I don't drive vehicles, but I'm going to use a Christian phone company. I'm going to, use go to a Christian school, those kind of things. So they're isolating themselves so they're insulating themselves within the culture. And again, they're kind of separationist, right?
Yeah.
And then you also have the Christians who represent the Sadducees. Can you think of people like that?
Yeah, just like people who like Christians try to follow like modern woke movements and stuff. Like
Yeah, that's right. You have so many of those people who are just like they think just like the Pharisees do. Maybe we've got it wrong.
Yeah, I feel like usually whenever I see those, it's less of like thinking maybe we got it wrong, and more so just like trying to adapt to the society as a means of evangelizing, if that makes sense.
It is. You're right. That's exactly right. Instead of it being a pure motive, like I'm trying to keep it right, they're more just scared of being looked down upon. Because the Sadducees did love it. They loved the positions that the Romans would give them. They loved the prestige that the Romans allowed them to have.
Yeah.
And so you have this within our society as well, where you have people who move far, far outside, or maybe even not that far outside. They just compromise. They compromise their beliefs. The Sadducees had bad beliefs. Remember, Jesus agreed with the Pharisees. He just didn't like the wall that they built up in their legalism.
Yeah.
The Sadducees, he thought, these people have compromised. They don't even believe the word of God anymore. And so within Christianity, I see this all the time, and you may see this as well. And I know we've talked about this before. You've got such an issue today with the gay movement, with the transvestite movement, and you have so many people today that are Christians, I'm finding, that are willing to compromise. And easily do compromise and find a way to make something like the resurrection that's very clear, something in the Bible that was very clear. They try to make some way to reinterpret the scripture so that we can, maybe they don't have the idea of I'm trying to be cool, but some of these people really may have a good heart and say, I really want these people to love the Lord, and I want to consider that I might be wrong. Right?
Yeah.
So, that the main thing I wanted to say, I think it's cool, is that no matter what, you can always find this. Whenever you go back to the 19th century, you have the rise of modernism, or it's already risen for a long time, but in the 19th century, industrialism. And you have the same thing happen in the 19th century, where you have, of course, the Amish who run off, you have us who stay in, and we become fundamentalists. And the fundamentalists were no different than the Pharisees. You've heard the terms fundamentalism, evangelicalism, liberalism.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing. So you got fundamentalists who are they're the ones who would separate. They have more of a tendency to separate. You have the liberals who have more of a tendency to integrate.
Yeah.
And then you have the people in the middle, which are supposed to be the balanced ones. And this is how evangelicalism started. Evangelicalism started as a reaction to liberalism, who were all compromising, and didn't believe the Bible was inspired anymore, didn't believe in miracles because science say there can't be miracles, but we're still Christians. And they were saying, yeah, of course we're Christians. And denominations after denominations fell into this into the 19th century. You had Harvard, Princeton, Yale, all of whom are traditionally, Notre Dame, all of whom are Christian schools in their name, in their history, were started by the Baptists, the Presbyterians, the Congregationalists. They were started there. They weren't trying to be separationists at that time. It's just everybody was a Christian, and so each denomination was starting one because they had the money to do it, right?
Yeah.
So you have in the 19th century, it all started to fall. Liberalism comes in, says, you believe the Bible, that's crazy. We already know science says there can't be a Bible that is inspired. We already know evolution says there doesn't have to be a God. And then they start scratching their heads and they say, all right, well, let's get on board with them, right? Mm-hmm. They're like, but aren't we Christian anymore? And they're like, yeah, as long as we love each other, that's what the main thing that Christ taught. As long as we follow Jesus in the sense of him being a great example, we don't have to believe he's God. We don't have to believe he's the only way. Then you had the reaction to them, which were the fundamentalists, who went to the other extreme and separated. So let's get away from society. Look what it's doing to these people. And they're the ones who, even my school, Dallas Theological Seminary, was started at that time in response to it, which Dallas Theological Seminary was very fundamentalistic at the beginning. And they separated. So whatever the Romans do, we're not going to do. When in Rome, do what the Romans do. That's one side, the left. And whatever the Romans do, don't do what they do. So they hated it all, separationist. And then Billy Graham, which of course you've heard of Billy Graham some. He died not too long ago, but he was a big part of my life. He was just everybody knew who Billy Graham was. He was a major leader. And Billy Graham was a fundamentalist. Or at least he came from fundamentalism. See, fundamentalism didn't start bad. They were just responding to all these people who were compromising, right? Yeah. But fundamentalism moved further and further to the right. And fundamentalism, think of the name, the fundamentals. If they would have just stuck with that, it would have been better. But they did the same thing. They built a wall around the fundamentals to protect the fundamentals. And so, it gets so bad sometimes. If you don't belong. If you're not Church of Christ, you're not a Christian. If you're not, a Roman Catholic, you're not a Christian. Yeah. Well, the Catholics, that's a whole different story. But you have a response with Billy Graham. Billy Graham is a representative of kind of the first evangelical. And Billy Graham in 1951 was invited to go to New York to preach at what's called the World Council of Churches. And the World Council of Churches was a very, very liberal group. They were far to the left. They were the Sadducees. And so you had this other side say, what are you going to do? What are you going to tell them? You can't go there and preach because you can't compromise. And Billy Graham did something so great and is illustrative to me and will always influence me. But he said, wait a minute. I want to go anywhere and everywhere that I can where people need me, need the gospel, as long as they don't make me compromise. Yeah. So he did go to the World Council of Churches. He preached, but he preached the real gospel, not the walled gospel, not the one that was separationist. He preached the real gospel, not the one that was liberal. And he became at that point kind of the leader of an evangelicalism. And evangelicalism said, hey, listen, we know that there are essentials. We know that there are things that are absolutely clear we do not compromise, but we also know the culture isn't all bad. God made the culture. We're going to have culture whenever we get to the new earth that will always be advancing. Yeah. So they are right in the middle. And in a sense, I'm not saying we are just based upon this story, but we're trying to be more like Christ, right? We're trying to come into a world that is all divided and stand up for the essentials, yet at the same time rock the world as far as the compromise, right? Because he did. He rocked the world as far as the compromise. He said there is a resurrection from the dead. Yeah. And now you can also think of this, Will, in the form, you can think of it in anything, but think of it whenever it gets into politics. It's the same type thing. Yeah. You've got the far right, the far left, and then it's hard to figure out how to navigate in the middle, or even if there is a middle anymore. Yeah. And I think that that's something, especially right now, because we've got such a time, everything has changed, to really think about. Yeah.
Kind of the way that I envision that is you've got, the Pharisees in the middle, separationist off on the left, and then, the Sadducees on the right, and they're all, picture it, they're in a line, they got a rubber band attached around all of them, right? Yeah. And the Sadducees see the culture always moving to the right. the Sadducees see the culture always moving to the right, and their solution to the culture moving to the right is to stretch the rubber band to the right and try and bring the whole rubber band to the right to follow them. Because if the rubber band stretches too far, it's going to break.
Yeah.
So they want to follow them. And I think that the Pharisees want to stay right where they're put and let the rubber band stretch, and hopefully it'll bring it back. And then you have the separationists, and they want to run the opposite way to bring society back towards the center and try and stretch it this way to pull them back.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just a matter of kind of, they're all like attached in the same thing. They just have different ways of keeping it in the same spot.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that they. Are you saying they don't always want people to go so far in that direction?
Yeah, it's
you're,
like
you're
I think,
just pulling them just so you can get them.
All three groups are trying to keep society within the rubber band, which I guess you could call Christianity in general.
Yeah.
And so you're either going to run with them, you're going to stay put, and have resistance that way, or you're going to run the opposite way and try and pull them back.
Yeah. It's funny.
But too much tension is going to break it.
Well, you do say that. That's funny because it's really hard for us to defend our position, or to hear somebody else defend their position. Let's say it's the Sadducees, and then you're over here, like you said, you're far to the right, and it is so different than your position that you just dig your heels down in even more, right?
Yeah.
I'm not budging at all. I'm not even going to look at that side. Why? And then most of the time, it's not just because the other side doesn't have anything right. It's because the other side is so radical. Both sides are so radical. And often their attitudes are incredibly radical. And it makes them unable to talk to each other.
Yeah.
Unable, without getting the other side with their heels dug in further than they would have ever been to begin with.
Yeah.
And Christ comes in and basically rocks both their worlds because of the way he challenged the Pharisees and the wall that they had built up, and the wall became the law, and the wall was the only thing they cared about anymore rather than the law itself. And then the compromisers who compromised everything, and everything they believed it wasn't really true anymore. And I don't know how, I would love to be there. All we have is the few illustrations, but we know that the way he did it, they talked about him teaching with authority and with grace. The way he did it was just as important as what he did or what he was saying. The authority he taught with, the confidence that he taught with, and the grace he taught with, because who did he go to? He went to those people everybody else wanted to go to. You see, the Pharisee, or the further to the right you go, you won't go to anybody on the left, right?
Yeah. Because
they're polluted, they're dirty, they're compromisers, and so you dig your heels more in over there. But Christ came in, and what was he called? A friend of tax gatherers and drunkards.
Yeah. Which
is crazy. And the thing is, those tax gatherers and drunkards, they didn't really care about one side or the other. It wasn't that they were dug in. Anytime he went to the extremes, they all hated him. Sadducees hated him. The hardcore Pharisees hated him. But all these people in the middle that were just mixed up, maybe they had positions, but they didn't really care that much. They were just people who were deeply in need. And Christ said, it's these people who need a physician. It's not the well who are needed of a physician. The people who believe they're well. And he was basically taking both the extreme sides and saying, you guys don't think you're well, so you won't listen to me. But these people are in the middle. They are the ones who need it, and they need it the most, and they will listen to something different. And I don't know whether he did this in a sense of coming in. He never claimed to be a Pharisee, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't trained to be a Pharisee. But I don't think he ever would have, because he wouldn't want to be, again, he would agree with their theology, but he wouldn't want to be identified with their attitude, with their hate, with their judgmental thoughts of other people, because he didn't have those things.
Yeah.
So he comes into this society. I think it's important for us to look at and say, what's our society set up like? And what would Jesus do in this society? Where would he go and how would he act? How would he have an impact? See?
Yeah.
Okay. You got any questions?
I kind of see, I don't necessarily think Jesus has to be a Pharisee, because, I think that all three of the groups, in their nature are a like essence of humanity. Like they want, if we were all perfect, if I've never bit from the apple, these groups wouldn't exist. We would all be unified regardless of opinion. I think that Jesus doesn't have to fit in with one of those. I think he can kind of just be like I mean, same way with politics. You don't have to identify with the middle, the right, or the left. You just have to, you could form your own opinions and try to unify. I don't think he has to affiliate with any one of the three.
Yeah, I think that's intentional for him.
Yeah, I just see it as like a innate flaw in humanity. Separation.
Mm-hmm.
We just naturally want to separate and isolate ourselves from other groups, and pick and choose and. Be one of ourselves.
I guess, if we kept on going with this, we could definitely ask the question of how is it that each one of these groups are exactly like today in our politics? And all I can do is say, think about it. Tell everybody out there to think about it, because I think you'll get, and what would Jesus do with these groups? How did he relate to the one that mirrors it in the Bible, and how would he relate to it today? Because I think it'd be very much the same. I think we would find ourselves in those groups. I'm not saying everybody isn't. There are a lot of people out there that I think that are doing a good job and are more like Jesus, but it's just easy. We have the sinful tendency to go in one of these directions, and we have to identify that. And I think somehow, if we find ourselves struggling in the middle, if we find ourselves asking the question all the time, was that right for me to do that? Was that, if it was too easy, then it was probably not right. If it's too hard, it's probably not right. But if you're struggling with it in the middle, wondering whether or not you should have done it, that's probably the best place to be. Yeah. I had Chuck Swindoll say that one time. It's like, if you're struggling about it, that probably means it's right. So, take heart, those of you who are in a tough world like we are. The world is very, very tough. And I pray that this helped you guys out, and thank you, Will, for joining me.
Yeah, no problem.
Theology Unplugged.